Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this info session for our pre-college workshop this semester at the Columbia Climate School. So my name is Cassie, and I oversee all of our non-degree programming, including our pre-college programs here at the Climate School. And just to give you a little bit of background for those of you who are joining us for the first time and learning about the Climate School, it's actually a super exciting time. We announced the school back in July 2020, and it's going to be the first new school to be established at the university in 25 years. And we're going to be drawing upon all of the strengths that we have in climate and sustainability, and we really want to build out our comprehensive programming and content and programs, and especially for our active high school learners who are very much interested in climate change and sustainability, and getting involved and learning more about how to become more involved in your own communities. So just to give you a little bit of a background about our pre-college offerings, these are non-credit workshops. So they're open enrollment, there's no application. We ask you a couple of introductory questions to get to know you a little bit. And at the end of the workshop, you do not receive a transcript from Columbia University. You do receive a certificate of participation from the Columbia Climate School that outlines how many hours you've participated in a workshop and what workshop you've participated in. These are flexible in terms of when they're being offered, and this particular workshop is that you're hearing about today, which is named Climate, Communities, and Decision-Making, is being offered on Saturday mornings starting in late October, and it's going to be offered by Sophia Ree. And Sophia joins us from the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity. And she is going to tell you a little bit more about the content of the workshop, but she has had a lot of fun experiences with pre-college students. She loves being in a teaching environment, and she's participated in other degree programs and other educational offerings at the Columbia Climate School. And throughout the, I will say one more thing, throughout the info session today, if you do have any questions, feel free to put the questions in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that. And once Sophia is done going over her slides that give you an overview of what we'll cover week to week, she will pause and we will both make ourselves available for questions. If you haven't been to the website, I encourage you to visit the website. That includes all of the details about this particular workshop, the fees that are involved. So it is a fee-based workshop, but we do have reduced rate options available for students who've participated in our past programs. So definitely get in touch with me if you have any questions about the fee or the or reduced pricing. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you today. This is for all of you. You've signed up to attend the info session to learn more about the workshop. So please don't hesitate to ask us your questions. So Sophia, whenever you are ready, if you want to take over.
Hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. I know it's Monday, but I really appreciate the time you're taking to get to know more about this course. So just for a bit of context, this course was developed with an actual high school AP environmental science teacher in Staten Island, and with some experts at Columbia's Earth Institute. And so this is a really interdisciplinary, really exciting course that I'm happy to present to you all today. So the course is called Climate, Communities, and Decision-Making. As Cassie mentioned, it'll be from October to December 2021. And if you attend, you'll be able to spend your Saturday mornings with me for 7 weeks. Oops, let me just continue on. Yeah, so just about me, this is just a blurb that you can find on the website as well, but I'm a current researcher at the Earth Institute, which is transitioning to Columbia Climate School. I focused on climate change, natural resource management, food systems, and nature-based solutions, basically climate mitigation in the past. I've worked in academia, I've worked at the Red Cross Climate Center, and my educational background is in social sciences and sustainable development. I think that this social science background I'm really bringing to this course, and I hope you will find interesting as well. So why is this course called, Climate, Communities, and Decision Making? That's not really, doesn't tell you a lot, but I think if you look at it, it really does, because oftentimes we'll have graphs and headlines that show us climate change in terms of like numeric values or warming, but what does this mean for us? Where is this data coming from, and how can we better understand the data to break down global trends and not only understand what they mean on average, but also in real concrete places and communities? So when the IPCC says there's been a big change in global surface temperature relative to 1850 to 1900, how can we understand this graph and then apply it in our own communities? How can we better understand the science behind it and help us make better decisions based on that? So not only are there general kind of data and graphs to parse down, there's also global trends and global inequalities that are still left kind of ambiguous when we're looking at climate change at a global scale. So when we're presented with global maps of vulnerability to climate change, not only are there differences in how often vulnerability or climate-related disasters take place, there's also a difference in where climate impacts are felt. So again, breaking down this idea of global climate change to local communities, maybe countries, maybe regions, or maybe your local neighbors. So when we're understanding vulnerability, we need to look at not only what climate change is happening, what weather events are happening. We also need to understand the social and environmental measures of vulnerability, such as proximity to coasts or measures of inequality. As our scientific understanding of climate change and scenarios change, and we update our understanding of atmospheric interactions, this map will continue to change as well. And what this course aims to do is take kind of all of the data that we're seeing and really bring them down onto the ground. Just setting up the context for the course. Again, these are all headlines taken in the last month. For instance, COP26, which if you are not aware is kind of the international conference based on governmental states to negotiate climate change within the UN framework on climate change. So COP26, which is going to happen in Glasgow in the fall, people are urging them to prioritize adaptation as climate emergency surges. We're also seeing news such as indigenous tribes facing displacement in Alaska and Louisiana say the US is ignoring climate threats. We are hearing with the recent Hurricane Ida in the Northeast US, we need a fundamental change in how communities are protected. We're seeing $15 billion packages to fight climate change, wildfires, and drought. So there's all of this energy and there's all of these headlines, and we're faced with different narratives on what actions need to be taken, as well as the will of the global community to act. So given the differing impacts on our safety, livelihoods, and ecosystems, we know that something needs to be done to address the current and future impacts of climate change, but what exactly and how do we get there? So just an overall of the course of the workshop, as Cassie mentioned, it'll be from October 23rd to December 11th, no session for Thanksgiving week. Just a quick reminder that all sessions will be recorded. It's not credit-based. There's no homework, but suggested readings will be in the syllabus, and I'm available for office hours. Back to the course. So this interdisciplinary workshop aims to provide students with the tools to understand both the science behind and the critical questions surrounding climate change adaptation actions. So what I want you to get out of this course is to interpret and contextualize climate and weather data. I want you to build written case study skills and verbal presentation skills. I want you to apply critical concepts of justice and equity to local and global challenges within climate change. I also want you to problem solve and think strategically under different spatial and temporal uncertainties. So that means, what is the climate risk we're facing? What are the projections in the future? What are the options that we have? And how do we problem solve this together to create an equitable and just adaptation outcome? And finally, I want you to leave this course with leadership skills to continue to advocate for climate adaptation and climate action in your communities, moving forward. And so I know that was a lot. How do you get there? I've broken the session down. It's in 7 weeks. Let me just go through quickly what each week will entail, and hopefully that will help with any questions. So overall, the sessions are structured into answering the broader question of, how do our understandings of climate change and climate risk interact with different contextual factors such as culture, value, ethics, identity, and knowledge systems? And what does this mean for the decisions we can take at a community level? So on the first week, I want to go through what are the impacts of climate change. So what is the difference between weather and climate data? What's the relationship between long-term climate change and short-term extreme weather events and natural hazards that often, create impacts on the ground, such as hurricanes, droughts, storms, etc. So then building on that, I want to go through what is considered climate adaptation. So we have an understanding of what the impacts of climate change are, but what exactly is adaptation? What does the landscape of global climate adaptation look like? What's the difference between climate adaptation and climate mitigation? What's the purpose of it? Who are the main actors involved? And how do different communities face disproportionate impacts of climate change? Then the next session will cover how do different societies understand climate risk. So not only are we understanding what the impacts are and what adaptation might look like, we need to then delve into how different societies face different impacts, perceive different impacts, and what data we need in order to make kind of decisions that are locally appropriate. So for instance, what is the difference between data availability and data accessibility, and what does that mean for communities on the ground? In what ways do policymakers incorporate risk into decision making? So then sessions 4 through 7 will build on that, and then we'll move into what are useful tools related to climate-related decision making. This part of the workshop will delve into the concepts of trade-offs, scenario building, and decision analysis. It sounds dry, but I promise it's really interesting. We're going to use a lot of case studies to introduce innovative approaches to adaptation decision making. With a particular focus on community-based programs, we'll discuss principles such as equity and concepts of timescales, constraints, resources, and know what policymakers are using in order to make those headlines that we've seen. The next session will go into uncertainties. So when we talk about data, when we talk about communities, when we talk about anything really, there's so many uncertainties all along those chains. Perfect decisions do not exist. Instead, decisions are based on the information that we have and the weight that we give to them. So this session will further interrogate the uncertainties prevalent in each step of decision making, ranging from the data themselves to the hidden power dynamics among actors. We will discuss intended versus real outcomes of climate decision making and introduce the concept of maladaptation, which is when a particular decision actually works in reverse of what the intended outcome was. For instance, making communities even more vulnerable to the risks of climate change. We'll also then go into decision making for who by whom. This topic is of particular interest to me because this goes into the ethics of decision making. How can we scrutinize power dynamics, affecting not only what decisions are made, but also what decisions are even thought possible? Using case studies in this session will include key topics such as social inequalities around gender, race, and class, impacting structures around decision making. And we'll ask, how do social inequalities impact adaptation design and outcomes? Finally, in our last session, we'll really delve into community-based adaptation examples and practices. So some questions are, what will adaptation look like in the future under different climate change scenarios, and why are local actions important? How can we improve our adaptation strategies? What does adaptation in our communities look like, and how can we lead relevant climate action moving forward based on our better understanding of science and communities that we've learned in the last 6 sessions? One second. Perfect. So that's kind of the 7 sessions that we've had built up for you, ranging from the science, ranging from the social science to other critical concepts. So I've just pasted the learning skills here just to kind of contextualize what I've said in the beginning. So again, I want you to understand climate and weather data. I want you to use case study skills and verbal presentation skills that we'll use throughout the course to hone your research skills and also hone the way that you communicate issues of climate change to other people. I want us to go through these concepts of asking who has the power and who decides what we're even thinking of in terms of justice and equity, and then apply them to local and global challenges as you're interested in. And again, problem solving and leadership skills. This course is about creating future generations of active learners passionate about equitable responses to climate change. I want students to leave the class feeling empowered to engage with climate challenges in their communities, while also being self-reflexive and challenge students on what we know. This class will cover everything from climate science to climate justice to policy and policy making, disaster response, and differing worldviews. This workshop is a jumping board to guide students to connect the dots and find aspects of climate action they're interested in. I really value discussion, and I think that in this workshop, we should learn from one another. This is a course to ask questions and learn where to look for answers. I'm happy to go through any of the slides before, any of the sessions if they didn't make sense, and answer any questions that you have. But those are kind of my final remarks. And Cassie, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Great, thank you, Sophia. So I'm just going to switch my view there. There I am. So that wraps up the overview of the workshop that Sophia is leading. And I just wanted to open it up for questions from the participants. And while you're thinking about any questions you might have, Sophia, I might get things started here just to ask, you mentioned the various case studies that you might be looking at. Could you give us one example of what one of these case studies might be? And I know that from your own work, there's local or national case studies and examples, but there's also international work, which I think is really important to also bring in, even though most of the attendees here are based in the US. I think it's important to perhaps highlight that they would have an opportunity to learn from case studies that are not just from North America or locally and what we know in our own communities. So if you could give us an example, that would be great.
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. I really, sorry, just to quickly say, I really want this course to kind of be designed in the interest of everyone who's attending. So if there are particular regions or particular countries of interest, we're happy to go through those together. So for instance, one example of climate adaptation, which is a really prominent one, might be, the Inuit community in Alaska and how they're coping with the impacts of climate change and how we're understanding sea level rise. That's a big one. There's also communities in, for instance, Thailand who are doing things called autonomous adaptation, which are really kind of going against the grain of major adaptation models. Super exciting. I'm happy to continue, but there's a really big range. And again, I want to highlight voices in adaptation that are often overlooked. I want to highlight voices in adaptation that are not top down, but rather bottom up.
Great, thank you. And I think that makes that makes a lot of sense. In terms of curious about if you could also perhaps speak to if someone is, I'm going to back up a step here. because we put these pre-college workshops together, not necessarily to ensure that everybody who joins these sessions are going to become future scientists or future researchers who work at Columbia University doing climate science research or climate change research. I think you've touched on a lot of interesting other subject areas that are of interest. So you might start with the foundations, which is really the data. How are scientists getting their information? How accessible is this information? How valid is it? How do you learn to be a better data user? And then how do you apply it to all these other fields? And so I think it's great that even if you don't, even if chemistry or earth science isn't your favorite subject in school, or math is not your favorite subject in school, that's totally okay. And so I want to encourage sort of the attendees here to think about what a workshop like this could how it will help support you, and how it will help continue to support you as you decide what you might want to do in the future, and how you want to be involved in climate change. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, Sophia, what you think, who might find this workshop really interesting. And just because you might not be a science or math oriented person, if you're really interested in social sciences, I heard a lot of wonderful things about, the psychology and the power dynamics and decision making and policies. So if you could just speak to, I guess, the interdisciplinary nature of the workshop, and who might find it most interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for bringing that up. So I think that this course, as I mentioned in the beginning, is really geared with an interdisciplinary lens. I think it's designed for students who want to learn about all of these different aspects of climate action. Climate decision making is just, another term for climate action. And students who want to know all of the different sides, students who are maybe exploring what part of climate action they're interested in. If they're maybe more interested in really getting behind the science, if they're more interested in community advocacy, if they're interested in, just building coalitions, building communities, using all of these different languages. I think what this course does is it exposes you to what kind of the climate community is saying, whether they're in policy, whether they're in science. It teaches you all of these terms that people are using and helps you kind of navigate them so that you can take them on yourself as well. One thing that I do want to mention is I will be having several guest speakers join in. I didn't mention this before, but I should have, but they will bring in a lot of perspectives that perhaps I don't have in academia, whether it's in the private sector, humanitarian sector. I want them to come in and share their experiences as well regarding how they're using climate data, what they're looking at, how they are incorporating really critical social questions. Hopefully that'll be of interest as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I just want to, one last sort of quick reminder, if you do have any questions for Sophia or for myself, feel free to type it into the Q&A box as we wrap up here. I think one of the things Sophia mentioned that I will also highlight is that you get to meet other students, other like-minded students who live in different parts of the country, and potentially even a different part of the world, depending on who ends up participating in the workshop. And that is super important. And as you kind of build your networks to do what it is you want to do and to take action around climate change, these connections will stay with you, hopefully. But it's really important. It's a really fantastic opportunity, an important opportunity for you to also connect with like-minded individuals. So I think it's a great opportunity to do that. And as Sophia mentioned, there will be guest speakers. And she's also, there'll be sort of co-instructors for the workshop as well, and they'll bring in their perspectives from their work that's going on. And one is I would say one is Andrew Krukevich, I am pretty sure I'm saying his last name incorrectly, at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And he does a lot of this, applying applications of climate science data for users. And he does a lot around food security. And then the other individual is also from the same center that Sophia is at. And his work is very much sort of on sustainable development, but climate change itself and sustainable development is in and of itself a process of conflict resolution. So how do you get past a conflict resolution, and how do you sustain these actions? And I think Sophia's point about teaching you the terminology and navigating your way through that terminology, and thinking about even the power structures within the words and the terminology, and who gets to decide what those words are and what concepts are being discussed. There's so many interesting aspects of this workshop, and I think there's a little bit of something for everyone. And she has set it up and designed it in a way that is open to everyone. So there are no prerequisites. And I'll say that, because all the sessions are recorded, if you are concerned about missing a session, don't be. We make the recordings available, and you'll have access to the recordings in the future as well. So you don't just lose access once the workshop is over. And we share slides and notes. And as Sophia said, she's always available for office hours. And we're it's flexible. We know that you all have very busy lives, especially after school and weekend activities. And we just really want you to see this as a learning opportunity, and from Columbia experts. And it is not like a regular class that you might have in your high schools. So with that, I don't see questions. Sophia, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I guess just a final note would be, I'm really excited about this course. I think that it offers a slice of everything in a way that will really help students just kind of take that into whatever field you want to go into. So it's thinking about things systemically, it's putting the pieces together, and interrogating with the right critical questions that I think you can take anywhere. So I hope to see you in my classrooms. Again, this is going to be, I think, a fun interactive experience, and I want to learn from you as much as I have to offer you.
Fantastic, thank you. So I don't see questions. I addressed the one question in the Q&A box. We are going to wrap up on time. We're very respectful of your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. If you do have any questions, definitely email me. You all have my email at this point. I will be sending up a follow-up message to everyone tomorrow or by Wednesday at the latest with a recording of this info session as well. So if you do have friends who you think might be interested in this, definitely reach out feel free to share it as well. And Sophia, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all of our attendees. And we hope to see you soon. All right, have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye.
Bye.